Did you know that the #1 cause of a bad snare sound isn't the way the drum's tuned or even the drum itself? It's how you, the drummer, are hitting it. And that all starts with snare height, position, and angle. Hey, if you ever feel like you've been struggling to hit your snare in the center, which is going to give you the best sound, or play consistent rim shots if you're trying to play nice and loud and pull that full crack out of your snare, or you just want to feel comfortable and confident behind your drums, like they're an extension of your body, but you're having a hard time doing all of this, then today's lesson is definitely for you. The snare drum is where you'll play the most notes, probably even more than you'll play on the kick drum. And so this is a pretty important component of your drum set to get right. A lot of these things out here don't matter nearly as much as being comfortable with where your snare drum is. If you get your snare height, placement, and angle just right for your body and your playing style, you'll feel at home and comfortable on the drums, which means being relaxed and feeling confident, both of which are absolutely critical to sounding professional. So today I'm breaking down my 5-step process for finding your perfect snare height, placement, and angle so that you're feeling way more comfortable and confident. You can do this. Welcome to the Non-Glamorous Drummer. Glad you're hanging out today. I help self-taught beginner drummers know what to practice so that they can nail songs and become the drummer other people want to have in their band. Now there's a big problem especially if you're a beginner, but this is a big problem that I'd say 99 if not 100% of drummers deal with at some point, and that is a weak hand. If you notice that you have a hand that gets stiff easily or can't play as fast and loud, it tends to want to just live on the snare, it can't move around the kit, it can't keep time. There's all these limitations on that one hand. If that's you, I want to help you solve it, but not by traditional methods of saying, all right, go through all these trainings to solve your weak hand. What I want you to do is take the test. So I've got a free test set up in the description below. It's the do you have a weak hand? That's question number 1, or how weak is your weak hand test that will help you pinpoint exactly what issue might be going on with your weak hand specifically. And so instead of having to go through a whole bunch of generic stuff that might help a bunch of people, this is very specific and you will know exactly what you need to practice. You just go through, follow the steps, answer the questions, and if there's a problem, you'll know exactly what you need to practice because there are links in the guide to specific lesson videos that'll help you out with this. So it'll be a lot of fun. You'll enjoy working through it, and it'll be a really good test for you to continue to go through as you're working on solving that weak hand, just to check your progress and see where you are. All of that is so that you can play evenly and fluidly and smooth fills around the kit, and that'll boost your confidence so much. So go grab the test, take the test below, totally free. So I remember this one time I was playing on a gig. It's not just one time, there were several times like this, if I'm willing to admit them, where I'm playing along and my snare just sounds horrible. It's kind of like, it just kind of sounds wonky and amateur and just not good, when really what we want is like that, where it's nice and clean and it's nice and crisp and precise and cuts through the mix and feels good. Because if you listen to a great record, every backbeat on the snare sounds and feels the same. But that was not what was happening to me this one day. It was super irritating, super annoying. I felt like an amateur. I was playing professionally, but I felt like an amateur. Because it's like, what am I doing wrong here? Why can I not get a good snare sound out of my drum? What is up with this? And it's hard to play music well if you're not inspired by your instrument. Everybody deserves to be inspired by their instrument and create a great sound out of it. But if you can't make a good sound with your snare, how are you supposed to focus and create a good feeling groove and sound good on the rest of the kit? Because this is the core. This is like, if the kick drum is the heartbeat, this is, the brain. It's an important part of the drum set, and you've got to get it sounding good. But I started playing around with some things. I made a couple of slight adjustments to the height of my snare, the angle, the exact position, and everything. And it ended up making a world of difference. And I'll share with you a couple other things I practiced too that helped out a lot with that. But I really want to help save you a lot of time and frustration and help you do this too right now. So here's where we're going today. If you get your snare height, placement, and angle just right for your body and your playing style, you'll feel at home and comfortable on the drums, which means being relaxed and feeling confident, both of which are critical for sounding professional. So this is a big deal, and I hope this really helps you out a lot. So here's the 5-step process for finding your perfect snare height and position. We are mostly talking about height. That's the big thing that was in the title, but we can't we can't talk about height without talking about placement and position, as well as one other thing that's really the key prerequisite. First, make sure you're sitting comfortably. That is like the fundamental thing that we tend to miss sometimes, because we get our drums set up a certain way where it's like, okay, this is good enough, I can play. And we start to notice, you know what, maybe I'm not sitting quite right. My back kind of hurts here. What if I went higher or lower, or further back or closer or whatever? But making that change isn't really a simple thing, because then you've got to adjust all of your drums. Like if you move your throne, you now got to move everything else. Sometimes you can maybe just move your kick drum a little bit if you don't have anything attached to it, or you can just move your throne a little bit. It all depends. But sometimes that can feel kind of daunting, like, well, what if I change this? It's going to mess everything else up. Well, the most important first thing to do with drum set, ergonomics, and setup, especially if you're a beginner, is get comfortable with how you're sitting. Now, we won't go in depth with this today because we're talking about snare. So I'll link some other lessons in the description that we've done in the past here on the channel. Long story short, if you're playing heel down, sit far enough back that you're comfortable playing heel down. Sometimes the reason a lot of drummers don't want to do heel down is because they're actually trying to sit too close, and that's why it's difficult. If you're playing heel up, sit high enough. Sometimes the reason drummers don't want to do heel up is because it feels too awkward because they're not sitting high enough. And so if you're heel up, you got to sit pretty high. If you're heel down, you got to sit pretty far back. And so play around with those things and make sure that you are comfortable with where your kick drum is in relation to your throne, how far back and how high you are. And once that's feeling good enough, doesn't have to be perfect by any means. Once it's feeling good enough, then let's talk about the snare. So what I'm going to do here is just lower my snare a whole bunch. So it's like way down here. This is lower than probably anybody should have their snare. For me, it's actually my knee height. But if I have it way down here at knee height, it's like awkwardly low. But I'm kind of getting it out of the way right now. So as we're talking about some of these ways to find your height, it's not in the way, and we can then adjust it into place according to the methods that we're going to use. So 5 steps. First thing I want you to do the door hinge motion with one of your sticks, air playing with your hands. So if you've seen any lessons here on the channel before, you've heard all about this. If you're new, what I mean by door hinge motion, anytime we're gripping, we're forming a fulcrum point here on the stick, and we need to be able to toss the stick up and down. In other words, we need to be able to airplay, because if we can airplay, that means we're able to create a motion with the stick, which makes it a lot easier to move around the drum set. In a nutshell, that's the big why. So toss the stick up and down like this, just gently in your hand. So we've got our fulcrum point, we're letting it drop down and back up. And what I want you to do, do this with both hands. Get your grip feeling comfortable with both hands. So you're gripping both sticks at a comfortable spot here. And you're kind of just going like this. Ask yourself, okay, where do I want my snare to be? Like, does it feel like I should be hitting the snare up here? Probably not. Hopefully not. Does it feel like I should be hitting the snare way down here? I don't know about that. That's a long way down. So just close your eyes and play around and notice, like, okay, where would be a really comfortable spot to be hitting? And that can be a really good guideline for where to start. Now, before I adjust my snare to that, we're going to go ahead and jump to what we're going to do is kind of go through all of these, because they all work together. It's not like one of these will give you the height and then you're set. It's kind of like, okay, this gives you an idea. Okay, this next thing will give you another idea, and so on until you gradually get it all fine-tuned. But for me, based on this, if I've got my feet on the pedal here and I'm playing like this, look at where my sticks end up resting. So I could have them rest right here, but then I kind of feel like my arms are too high. I could have them rest right here. I could have them pointed down. There's so many different ways that you can play, and so many different drummers play these different ways. But what is most comfortable to you? What feels right? For me, it's about right here. And so this is what, once we raise my snare up, you'll find that I've got it about right in this spot where the sticks will be landing on it right now. But let's keep moving through these. So the second step, at what height or angle can you easily and comfortably play rim shots or center? So this can get kind of interesting. Let's raise the snare up to where, according to our last point, where we think it ought to be. It's gonna be about right here. Let's see if this feels about right. Yeah, this feels pretty good. So what we want to pay attention to, is this too high to play in the center without accidentally playing a rim shot? If we're trying to go, that was center, not rim shot. If we're trying to play center, but we keep accidentally going, and doing like way too much shaft on the rim, then we know, okay, we either need to lower it a little bit or we need to tilt it toward us. Now, what I like to do is play around with the angle. And for me, the sweet spot angle of my snare is about a 9-degree tilt. Now, if you have an iPhone, you can go to the Measure app and lay your phone on your snare and it'll tell you how far it's tilted. That's how I happen to randomly know that. You might find that your sweet spot is 7 degrees, 10 degrees. Doesn't have to be the same as mine. But for me, it's like 9 degrees, maybe 8's okay, 10's a little too much. At 8 to 9 degree tilt, tilted exactly toward my center, that's the angle I want my snare at. And for some reason at that angle, it's just perfect for me, where I've got it at this height, the height that my hands want it to be at, which is a couple inches above my knees. Different for everybody. I'm just telling you where it's at for my body. I'm tall and skinny and like 6'4". We're all different builds. It's going to be different for everybody. So these are just guidelines, and I'm trying to help you figure out what works for you rather than tell you what I'm doing or give you specific measurements. But I give you the 8 or 9 degree thing because a lot of other students that I've told this to have said, oh, that feels really good. That works well. That's a good angle. And so that can be a starting point, but that's going to depend on the height you have it at. If you like having your snare a little lower, you might want less angle. If you like having it a little higher, you might need more angle. That way you can be comfortable with hitting center or doing rim shots. Be able to go back and forth and say, okay, I'm going to do a measure of center and then a measure of rim shot like this. You could probably hear that difference. The first 2 backbeats were center, the next 2 were rim shot. And so be able to feel good either way. That's a good way to know you've got your snare in a good spot. Now, step number 3. Let's talk about how far away your snare should be, because all of this height stuff, it's really incomplete if we don't talk about like where your snare actually is. So it's kind of a given that it needs to be directly in front of your center. When you sit down at the drum set, your center should not be focused this way toward the kick drum. Really, it should be a little bit to the left, right? Because you've got your right foot on the kick drum, left foot's on the hi-hat. So our center is facing this way. My center is facing this way, parallel with my sticks pretty much right here. So we know that as far as, laterally, that's where it needs to be positioned, evenly between my legs. But as far as distance away, this is something you can play around with. Every drummer is different. We're all different heights, and some drummers like to play with it like in their lap. Others want to have it a little further away. I'm a little bit more of the further away school of thought because it just feels easier to me. It feels more natural. My arms are also pretty long though, so it's probably going to look further away for me than it would for somebody who's shorter, even though ratio-wise it could be the same. But here's our step number 3. With upper arm straight down, so we're talking about above your elbow, with upper arm straight down, where do the tips of your sticks land? So if you're just, holding your sticks right here and you look down at, down your shoulder, okay, if my arms are not back and they're not forward, if it's just like straight down right here, where do the tips of the sticks land? So for me, if I'm sitting up nice and straight here on my stool, the way I'm going to play, for me, it actually ends up being like, I think just a little bit below center, where I've decided that my snare is comfortable. My sticks are landing, the tips are landing a little bit below center. This does not have to be a 100% black and white rule, but if you find that yours are landing like right here, then you probably need to move your snare closer. If you find that they're landing right here, like way off of center, you probably need to move it further away. That way you're not having to play like this or this, because it needs to be within easy reach. The majority of the notes we play are going to be on the snare. But if you're within a couple inches, that's probably fine. Like I said, my sticks fall short of the center just a little bit, but it feels right to me, because then if I kind of, sit up a little straighter, it ends up being like right there on it. So kind of ballpark estimate. Just have your arms nice and relaxed right here. Where do the tips of your sticks land? That can inform how far away or how close your snare is once you've decided on that height. Now, something else you can do for, as we just go down the list here, figuring out snare height. And this could also play a little bit into angle. Step number 4, with forearms angling down just a little bit from level, what height does your snare want to be? So kind of a general thing, I'm looking at myself in my camera screen here. If having my forearm level meant that I was hitting the snare, like if the snare were this high, like belly button height, that would be way too high. But if you angle your forearm down a little bit from level, however far a little bit is, I don't know exactly what this angle is, but angle it down a little bit so it's kind of just a comfortable angle. We've got this nice and straight. We're not reaching forward, not reaching back. Arm is relaxed. It's just a comfortable spot to be. Where does the stick want to land? Are we ending up like right here? Okay, maybe the snare should go lower. If we're ending up, way down here, maybe the stick should come up a little bit. The reason why I bring this step to your attention, I've had students who are trying to figure out how to grip loosely. And sometimes because their snare is too high, it actually inhibits loose grip. And the reason why is because you need to be able to like loosely kind of have this kind of grip with your hand where like instead of playing like this, imagine the snare is way up high right here. We're playing like this. We have to keep, the stick up here on our palm, right? If we're playing up really high. But if the snare is lower, well, that gives us this ability to like drop down and kind of extend our hand. It's like reaching out for a handshake, but kind of letting our hand like drop down. And so as we're doing that, it gives us this ability to be looser so that you can actually get more of this kind of loose, relaxed up and down motion from your stick much more easily. Sometimes it's easier to play relaxed on your snare when it's lower versus when it's higher and it causes you to tense up a little bit. And that's why I think I've kind of erred on the side of my snare being a little bit further away, maybe a little bit lower, because that feels right to me where I can have this kind of angle, where as I'm sitting here playing, see how my hands are kind of, gently bent down. It's not like a crazy bend or anything, but it's like this gentle bend down instead of being like this. That way, as I'm playing, my wrists are not completely level. Like, yeah, my wrist goes up. Like, my wrist is obviously moving as I play, but my default resting position looks about like this. You don't have to model mine perfectly. You don't have to look just like this. We are all different because we are human beings, not robots. And so this is not the one method. But this is just a guideline. Doing this might help you out with finding the height that's comfortable for you. So, by the time you go through all of those of, air playing, what feels right, and, rim shot versus center, where can you do both pretty smoothly? With upper arm straight down, where do the sticks land? With forearm angled down a little bit, where do they want to land? You go through all these and you answer these questions as best as you can, you're going to get your snare in a pretty comfortable spot. So step number 5, our final step here, and this might actually be the biggest one. I know for me it has been. Step 5, trial and error. Move your snare super low, then super high. How does it feel? So if you're like, Steven, I don't know if this is working for me. I just gotta figure out what works for me. Yes, absolutely. Figure out what works for you. Go crazy low like I did earlier. So here's crazy low. It's funny how it's like I can force myself to make it work, but that's awkward. That's like way down there. I'm having to land the stick to play a rim shot, and it's really hard to get to the rack tom. If your snare is really low, it's going to be a bigger, a more upward reach to get to your rack tom. If your snare is higher, it can make it more of an even plane to the rack tom. So, okay, try that out and be like, okay, that doesn't work so well. Let's try it super high, higher than we think it ought to be, and see how that feels. Raising a snare up is one of the hardest things, unless you have one of those fancy, like, gas lift snare stands, because you don't want to lift the whole thing. Let's try like right here. This is pretty high. This seems awkwardly high to me. Let's see how this feels. So right there off the bat, I'm like messing up the rim shots because it's awkwardly high. I would definitely have to tilt it more. Comes back to that whole thing of I feel like I'm playing on a tabletop. So we know that that's too high. Okay, so go a little bit lower. And then what you do is you just go back and forth until eventually you're like, okay, maybe this is my sweet spot. Like I said, I can't tell you your perfect snare adjustment. You got to figure it out. So, okay, we lowered it back down to where it's like halfway between the way too low and way too high. How does this feel? Cool, feels good. So obviously it's in my pre-calculated sweet spot here, but it took a lot of time to figure this out, and it might take you some time too, but stay patient. Just know that it is always a process getting physically comfortable at your kit, getting things placed right. And I'm always making slight adjustments, and like the other day I was moving this floor tom like an inch or two, like, oh, does it feel better that way, feel better this way? It's a constant trial and error process, but that's how you get comfortable at your kit. Don't be afraid to move stuff. If you do this, if you get things at least more comfortable than they were 20 minutes ago, before you watch this lesson, and get it to where at least you're feeling more comfortable on your snare, then your snare will sound better. It will be punchier. You'll get a cleaner attack because it'll be more natural to land in the middle. What'll happen is you're not having to worry about where you're hitting because your default place that the stick wants to land will be right there in the center. Or if you're wanting to play rim shots, that's where your arm wants it to land. And that's what helps so much here. We don't want our snare position to be working against us. We want it to work for us. Where does the stick want to land? Let's put it right there. Also, your groove will feel better because your backbeats will get more consistent. I remember earlier I showed you the example of, when my playing was super messy and it was sounding like. It's definitely an exaggeration, but when all the backbeats are just a huge mess like that and all the snare notes are a huge mess and they're not intentional, it feels terrible. But then when you decide, okay, my backbeats are going to sound like this, my ghost notes are going to sound like this, suddenly, world of difference. Nothing wrong with ring. If you want to intentionally play off the center, okay, you do you, but be intentional about where you hit. The point is that they all need to feel the same. And that's what's going to happen when you get your snare comfortable, and you will feel more relaxed and confident yourself, leading to more creativity and better music making. Okay, as you go today, question for you, are you happy with where your snare is right now? If you can honestly answer yes, fantastic, that's awesome. But if you're like, yeah, if I'm being honest with myself, I'm not completely happy. Go through these steps. Trial and error, mess with it until you get it comfortable, and then just practice hitting it. Let's not neglect that. Practice hitting it over and over again, hitting the center over and over again, playing your singles in the center of the snare over and over again, playing rim shots over and over again. We've got other lessons here on the channel about rim shots. Go check those out. Practice hitting it over and over again. Practice playing grooves. Where does my stick want to land while I'm playing grooves? Remember that the way we perfect our setup is by playing. The more we play, the more we can fine-tune our setup, not by sitting here and talking about it and pondering it. By playing. By playing your drum set, you'll know exactly where things need to be or not be, and that'll save you a lot of stress and frustration as you get it more in tune with your body, so that the drums feel like an extension of you. All right, be sure to go take the weak hand test below. The How Weak Is My Weak Hand diagnostics test. It'll help you solve it so much faster because you'll know exactly what you specifically need to practice. So go grab that, totally free in the description. As always, know that you can do this. Stay non-glamorous. I'll see you on the next lesson.